My guest today, Joan Westenberg. Joan, how you doing today?
You know what? I can't complain, and even if I did, who'd listen?
Yeah,
It's there's
you're
enough to complain about in the state of the world right now.
you're in sunny Australia.
I am. Look, it's my kind of weather right now. It's kind of grey, kind of overcast. It might rain. I think I was born to live in the UK, but I wound up in Australia.
We'll make you melancholy yet. Just wait. All right, Joan, you're the voice behind Westenberg. It's a wonderful newsletter that I receive, that I subscribe to. You're a writer, you're a journalist, you're a perpetual creator. And you say here you're prying at the edges of systems to see what's holding them together or what's about to break. You created The Index, a reader-supported, zero advertising, bootstrapped indie news website. And your blog, Westenberg, where technology, philosophy, creativity, and productivity all come together, tangled and messy. Mostly because that's how things are in real life. It's also home to a web comic you draw, design, and write called Pizza Party. And people can work with you through Signal Versus, a marketing lab and agency for people who give a shit. This is good to know. This is all very good to know. All right, let's talk about um, tech bros for a while.
Let's
Okay,
do that.
let's talk about
Let's do that.
the
Yeah.
fascist tech bro takeover. And
Yeah.
feel free to dovetail that right into that great post you wrote called "The Great Tech Heist: How Disruption Became a Euphemism for Theft." So let's
Mhm.
talk about the tech bros for a bit.
Let's do
What
it.
yeah, what are your thoughts? What's going on in the valley? What's going on in America? What's going on in the world with these folks?
I mean, that's a big question, but I think it's actually one with a pretty simple answer.
Hmm.
We have a ruling class of people who spent decades being told that they were visionaries, that they were geniuses, that they were above the rest of us, being lauded by the tech press and by sycophantic social media followers, and even by regulators and governments who all said that these people held the future of humanity in their hands. And they heard that message, they imbibed that message, and that combined with their extreme wealth made them believe that they were a new separate class better than the rest of us. And when you believe that, you act accordingly, and that's where we've wound up. I think it really is as simple as that. You know, there's a degree of intellectual arrogance that comes with that level of wealth and insulation. There's a degree of philosophical arrogance, and we are enjoying and reaping the benefits and the predictable outcome of these dudes, these really rich dudes who believe themselves to be geniuses.
Yeah, yeah. And who all is in this club? We've got Elon,
We've got Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg.
mhm,
We've got
Peter Thiel.
honestly, we've got Peter Thiel, we've got Jeff Bezos, all the people involved with the PayPal mafia,
Yes.
with the big four tech company, all these folks. You can pretty much just go through the rich list, and you know it'd be faster to say who isn't in this club.
Hmm. Hmm. And what is this disruption that's happening here that's really just a euphemism for theft? This seems to be like a whole new brand of tech bros pimping themselves to be something they're really not. Do you want to
Yeah, I
talk to me
mean,
a bit
yeah,
about that?
when we talk about the word disruptive, if you are disruptive in like you get a call that from your kid's teacher that says they're being disruptive in class, no one thinks that's a good thing.
Hmm.
But we believe that it's good to disrupt the entirety of our social order and our economies, and because that's just the message we get from folks in tech. You know, disrupting things
Yeah.
is good on a macro
It's
scale.
good in and
Like
of itself. Yeah.
yeah, you know, if we've accepted that being disruptive is bad on a macro scale, it makes absolutely no sense to interpret that as being good on a macro. There is no there's no logic to that.
Hmm.
But there is this idea that if you can find a way to charge rent for things that were working perfectly fine before you, you are somehow a genius.
Yeah.
Um, but most of what we really see from tech, most of the quote unquote innovations that have been produced in the last 20 years of consumer tech, it amounts to very little more than creating new layers of abstraction. It's becoming middlemen to all these different places and not caring about what happens when that middle layer extracts almost all the value and leaves very little for anyone else. And like the prime example you can look at here is like journalism. The
Right.
internet disrupted journalism. And when it did so, what happened? What did we get left with? Well, I mean, the internet came in as a middle layer, supposedly, between publications and their audience. And that middle layer was, they were going to make it more easy for people to access news and read about the news. Well, what actually happened in the end was all the publications lost a lot of their traffic and their readership because people spent their time on social media instead of reading the news,
Mm.
which meant that these publications went out of business, which meant that Facebook ended up replacing community news. And look at the state of civic life in America right now as a result, and not just in America, everywhere.
Yeah.
We're seeing what's happening in the US right now, the absolute capitulation to oligarchy, and that's a bad thing, but it's not isolated to the US. And pretending that it is, that's an absolute fallacy. It's a dangerous fallacy. We're seeing the same impacts that the US is experiencing. We're seeing that across the world. We're seeing that in every nation to different degrees,
Hmm.
um, to different levels of success, but we're still seeing it. The state of the US right now, I think, is actually it should be a warning to every other democratic nation. Like if you don't do something to stop the the excesses of tech and to stop the slide into oligarchy, everyone's going to wind up like the US.
Hmm. And, you know, Bernie Sanders was talking about this in the 90s, right? Like he was
Yeah.
saying, we're
Yeah.
headed in this direction. Is he being deliberately shut down? Like, do you think people are going out of their way not to listen to Bernie because he is going to be a threat? Or do they just think, ah, crazy old Bernie, he's
Mm.
been saying this for years, don't listen to him?
I think there's a level of fracturing in the liberal, progressive, left wing kind of political sphere. And it comes down to the fact that being left wing, being liberal, being progressive, they aren't necessarily the same thing. And it does not actually necessarily translate to
Hmm.
being and believing in the same thing.
Hmm.
Um, I think Bernie represents a certain type of progressive leftism that some people really like, other people don't like,
Mm.
but there's no consensus of support around what he wants to do and who he is and so on. I think Bernie has a lot of really good things to say. He's always had a lot of really good things to
Yeah,
say, but part of the problem, I think, with um, left wing movements across the world is that they do tend to fracture and fragment
they
to
do.
to a dangerous degree. I mean, like we shouldn't be looking to emulate the right wing ever because for obvious reasons. But one thing I will say about the right is that there are very few there are a few moments when they fragment, and when they do fragment, they still come back together and
Hmm.
they still all vote the same way and
Hmm.
show up the same way and support kind of they close ranks. The right wing do close ranks,
They do.
um, and the left progressives, liberals, they don't. They will think in a more nuanced way about their candidates, and that's a good thing. Like, we
Hmm.
should be using our minds. We should be making better choices. We should be actively thinking about the people we vote for. Um, but the right don't do that. They just line up behind whoever the right wing candidate is, and they just
I know.
they just do that. So I think Bernie, I wouldn't go so far as to say Bernie is being silenced by anyone. I think Bernie is still a very strong presence in the party, and I think if Democrats really want to have any kind of way forward, they're going to have to eventually line up behind folks like folks like Bernie and AOC because I think they're the ones who are getting people energized.
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, the biggest problem with that left and progressive and liberal causes face in the US is getting people to show up and getting people energized. And
Yeah.
I think it's going to be folks like AOC and Bernie who do that.
Yeah.
We've seen that a centrist candidate in Harris
Hmm.
didn't get people to show up.
Right.
Didn't get, and I think we're at a point now where people are so numb to everything. People have become so nihilistic that you need something much more exciting, much more extreme to get people to show up
Mm.
and vote. And for
Mhm.
better or worse, I think probably for worse. Like it's not a good thing that that nuance no longer has any cut through. Like that is not a good thing, but it's where
Hmm.
we're at.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, we're definitely going to be talking about what might be some of the root causes for this division that we're seeing throughout the world. But
Mm.
for right now, I want to know why you call Mark Zuckerberg a coward.
Because he is.
Yes, we know.
This is a man who created a foundation
Hmm.
with his wife Priscilla. They had this goal of a stated goal of curing the world's diseases. That
Hmm.
every child would be able to be free of the world's diseases. That was the goal. A decade ago, 5 years ago, that was what they talked about.
Yep.
And now they are bowing and scraping to Donald Trump
Hmm.
as he literally cuts off funding for research that would cure those diseases. Zuckerberg and the Zuckerberg Chan Foundation, they said what they believed in. They said what they wanted to do. They said their goals. They stated their values,
Hmm.
and they've turned their backs on those values. And so what we're left with is a very simple calculation. If you said that this is what you believed in, and now you won't speak up to defend what you believe in, then either you didn't believe in those things, which makes you a liar, or
Hmm.
you do believe them and you're too scared to speak up, which makes you a coward. But that's pretty much the lay of the land. And if you take the third option, which is we changed our minds, well, why? Explain why you changed your minds on solving and curing the world's diseases. Why is that no longer important? These are the questions we should ask. If you've gone back on the things that you believe, are you a liar? Are you a coward? Or have you flip flopped? And in which case, why?
Hmm.
Now, my take on this is just that Zuckerberg is out for Zuckerberg and no one else. And I think that's pretty well supported by anything that's ever been published or said about the man. And I use that word lightly, um, the man himself. And I think a coward is the best way to sum it up. He does not have the moral fortitude or the moral courage to stand up for anything that he has said he believed in. And so
Hmm.
we're left to ask if he ever has believed in anything. There's a good chance he hasn't, or if he really just has no spine.
And why is that? Like I'm a philosopher, I'm an ethicist, right? I'm a professor. And to me, morals provide the very foundation of
Mm,
politics. Like all of politics is built on what do you think
yeah.
is the moral, the right, ethical thing to do? And then you build your politics on that foundation. How have some of the folks that we're talking about and others as well lost their kind of moral compass? Is it really just greed? Is it that simple?
I think some people are just selfish bastards.
Hmm.
I mean, how many times do you go out, you're driving down the road and you see somebody who is just changing lanes without indicating?
Hmm.
Using your indicator while you're driving is a real simple thing to do that protects and looks after other drivers on the road and looks after your own safety and makes the world safer for everyone. And there are selfish bastards who are still just they are too lazy to reach out and use the indicator on their car.
Hmm.
These are the same people who won't flush the toilet when they use a public bathroom.
Right.
These are tiny actions that the rest of us just do. Putting your trolley back where a trolley is supposed to go after you've done your grocery shopping.
Yeah, yeah.
There are people who just do not do these things, and it is
Uh-huh.
because they do not think of,
Right.
or they choose not to think of, other people.
Yeah.
And I just do think it is as simple as some people are selfish bastards.
Yeah. We have a
Um,
Canadian term for those
mm.
people.
Oh yeah,
Assholes. Assholes. So, you know,
yeah,
it might
yeah.
be a
No, I
more
mean,
universal term, but
yeah.
you
But
know,
that's what it comes down to, isn't it? And that it's these people just doing that, and there's probably a comorbidity of like success in business with selfishness. Maybe to get to the point where Zuckerberg and so on have reached, maybe you do need to have a degree of that selfishness and
yeah.
that lack of
Yeah,
consideration
yeah.
for other people. I don't know. I can't
Yep.
speak. I can't
I,
speak to that. I can't say. But what we can say is that if you look through the pantheon of the tech oligarchs,
mhm.
I mean, selfishness and a lack of moral courage seem to be pretty defining characteristics.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was UCLA, might have been USC. Somebody
Mm,
in Cali did a study and they had people trying to cross at a pedestrian
yeah.
crosswalk on busy streets. And the majority of the cars that didn't stop were like, Beamers, Audis, Mercedes.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
they basically drew the conclusion, that
yeah.
some people think that their time is more valuable, and therefore they're somehow not above the law, but it doesn't
Mm.
pertain to them as much, so to speak.
That's it, and I do think that anytime anytime you have a class of people who are insulated from the rest of humanity to an extreme degree, they're going to lose some of their own humanity.
Yeah.
And I think the tech oligarchs are certainly insulated to that point.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Let's talk about another tech
Mm.
oligarch. Let's talk about Elon. You maintain he's an
Yeah.
existential threat to big
Mm.
tech. How so?
I mean, at the end of the day, he is becoming close to the de facto leader of the United States. And
Right.
I don't think anyone would argue with that. He has a level of power and influence that is unheard of, for a private citizen. But that can't be good for the rest of technology. When you have one person, one man who is a direct competitor to your products, in the way that Elon Musk's X is a direct competitor to Zuckerberg's social platforms, or the way his SpaceX is a direct competitor to Bezos's space tech, um, or the way his Tesla is supposedly, if you believe his estimations about self-driving, a competitor to Google's Waymo. Now, this is a man who has massive conflicts of interest, massive amounts of influence, and is a direct competitor to most of the rest of big tech. That is a threat, because it means that he can influence and control the regulations, the government, what actually happens, and how his competitors' products are received or treated or investigated or not investigated, and so on. Now he controls, or he can control, a lot of that. And if you are running one of these companies that is in competition to Elon Musk, you have to be asking yourself, where is his influence going to hit your
Mm,
company? Because I don't think any of us are foolish enough to believe that Elon Musk won't use his considerable political power to harm his competitors. He absolutely will.
yeah. Yeah. I found this online. Philip Lowe was one of his closest friends.
Mm,
And he said, as sons of highly accomplished men who married Venuses, were violent and lost their fortunes, and who were bullied in high school, we had a number of things in common most people cannot relate to. Elon is not a Nazi per se. He is something much better or much worse, depending on how you look at it. Nazis believe that an entire race was above everyone else. Elon believes he is above everyone else. He used to think he worked on the most important problems. All his talk about getting to Mars to maintain the light of consciousness or about free speech absolutism is actually bullshit. Elon knowingly feeds people to manipulate them. Everything Elon does is about acquiring and consolidating power. That's why he likes far right parties, because they are easier to control. That is
mm,
also why he gave himself $56 billion, which could have gone to the people actually doing the work and innovations he is taking credit for at Tesla. His lust for power is also why he did XAI and Neuralink to attempt to compete with OpenAI and NeuroVigil, respectively, despite being affiliated with them. Unlike Tesla and Twitter, he was unable to conquer those companies and tried to create rivals. I fired him with cause in December of 2021 when he tried to undermine NeuroVigil. So that's coming from one of his best friends. So that's offers us a certain amount of insight that we might not otherwise have been privy to.
mm.
Um, what is going to be next with Elon? Is the bromance between him and Trump going to end? Is that something that's going to continue to get stronger? Like what, how do we see this relationship playing out?
It's hard to say. I mean, there are so many uncertainties at the moment. One of the big ones is what's going to happen to Elon Musk as Tesla's stock price keeps tanking. Will Tesla's stock price keep tanking?
Right.
At the moment, it looks like it probably will. He has like Tesla is a company that was built on a very liberal, progressive customer base, and Elon
Oh,
Musk
very
has
much.
actively done everything that he possibly can, everything in his power
And
to.
is it
Um,
Tesla or Tesler? I'm not sure. Is Trump right in calling it Tesler?
I don't think Trump is right in anything except politics, in which he's just really right wing.
Yeah.
Um, no, so I think yeah, if Tesla's stock price keeps tanking, and if if Elon Musk can't service the loans that are essentially collateralized to Tesla stock, what happens to his power and his influence at that point?
Right.
Nothing good. Um, right now, we know that Donald Trump has a long history of cutting loose, firing people who are bringing down his brand or who are embarrassing him or who have a low approval rating. And Elon Musk has a much lower approval rating than Donald Trump. And none of this is looking good for their relationship. But at the same time, and maybe their shared pragmatism might win. Maybe they can keep putting up with each other as long as they can maintain and hold power. It's hard to say.
hmm hmm Now I know one of the central, holy grails of artificial intelligence now is to attain what's called AGI or artificial general
Mm,
intelligence, and you've got Altman and,
mm,
and his crew building that compute farm in Texas,
mm,
the Stargate project.
mm.
And do you think in that any way that bothers Elon? Doesn't, right? Like he started OpenAI
Massively. I mean,
with Altman.
he's been feuding with Sam Altman on Twitter
Yes.
about the Stargate program. He's been yelling at Altman on Twitter. Altman's been yelling back. Musk came up with a proposal to buy
Yeah.
OpenAI. Or I think there's definitely a lot of bad blood there. And I think that ties back to what I said earlier about Musk being a threat to big tech. He clearly sees all these companies as a threat to him.
hmm
He's going to do his best to become a threat to them. There's no happy family going on. It is a bunch of squabbling, squawking oligarchs who are mad at each other, just united under the single umbrella of avarice.
hmm It almost feels like the world in some respects is being run by children, right?
It
Like,
really is, you know. And we talk about AGI. There's a lot of stuff about AGI, and AI is going to be bad for the world and so on. I can see and understand that perspective, but I also am not entirely convinced that AI could be any more cruel to humanity than humanity is being to itself.
hmm, interesting. Interesting. Now, you've claimed, speaking of tech bros, you claim Bezos is a self-humiliating hypocrite.
Mm,
And why is that? What's so bad about Jeff? I thought he was a good guy. He took
mm.
a Canadian William Shatner up in his rocket, right? What's so bad about Jeff?
I mean, if you read any of the biographies, autobiographies of William Shatner's co-stars on Star Trek, yeah, I think you might come to the conclusion that Shatner and Bezos probably would get along quite well together. Um, my comment about Bezos being self-humiliating, it goes back to a panel that he was on, an interview that he gave, where the interviewer asked him whether he was going to interfere with the editorial decisions of the
Yeah.
Washington Post. This was years ago, and Bezos said that if he ever did so, he would have humiliated himself, because to do that would be small and ridiculous, and it would be humiliating. Well, Jeff Bezos has now started meddling with the editorial direction of the Washington Post. So, by his own words, is he not humiliated? I think words have power. Words have power, and I do think that we can trace back the public statements of all of these tech billionaires, and we can see just how contradictory they have been, and how often they have proven themselves to be either duplicitous or um, idiotic, just because they have a long history of publicly, loudly, and um, and very calculatingly making these broad statements, these sweeping statements, these inspiring statements, and all they've done in the years since then has proven that it's all built on a foundation of cardboard. You know,
Mhm.
none of it has any staying power. None of it really matters. And Jeff
Mhm.
Bezos has said all kinds of things, but none of it means anything when he is faced with any kind of consequence, when he's faced with a moment of moral courage. None of it means anything.
And again, so much of what we're talking about comes back to either a lack of foundational ethics that these folks would live by or govern their lives by. Is it just something they've set aside? Is it something that gets in the way and it disallows them from getting more money?
I mean, we all we can do is judge people by their actions.
Hmm.
Um, and if you judge these men by their actions, they have damned themselves.
Hmm. Yeah.
I think it's as simple as that, you know.
Okay. Should we talk about RFK Jr., or is it just best not to talk about it at all?
It's really quite strange to be thinking about that man.
Hmm.
To see where he's come from, where he's gotten to, and so on. I first came across RFK Jr.'s um, I, extreme views, his anti-vax extremism,
Hmm.
through respectfulinsolence.com, through a blogger named Orak, who is Dr. David Gorski,
Hmm.
an oncologist and surgeon, who has been blogging for decades now about pseudoscience and medical quackery and anti-vaxxers. And for decades, Gorski spoke about this man, RFK Jr., and the harm that he was doing. And to have almost grown up reading this blog, you know, I was reading this in my early 20s, and I'm reading it now, and to see the harm that we have always known that men like RFK Jr. represented, and then to see him reach the the heights of health admin in the US. It's honestly, it is horrifying. It's quite depressing to see. It's horrifying.
And for Trump to say he's going to make us all healthy, right? Like he's going to make us
Yeah,
all better, like a single person like that could ever be able to do something like that. It just shows you the type of unrealistic connection
yeah,
Trump has with how the world actually functions, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
um,
No, I think it's there's so much grift, and there are so
yeah,
much misinformation and disinformation. There are so many lies. It's just
yes.
this is not the reality that I thought that I was living in.
No, no. The German word Weltschmerz is, aptly points out that we can become depressed because we know how we would like to see the world
Yeah,
be, and it's not. It's not living up to what we know we're capable of. And so
exactly.
the world is feeling this kind of Weltschmerz moment right now.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Now
It's horrific.
it is. You stated in an article, The Trillion-Dollar Lie, how AI
Mm,
fear-mongering backfired on Silicon Valley.
yeah.
Open source AI didn't just outcompete Silicon Valley, it exposed the rot beneath their self-made myth of
Mm,
inevitability that China was able to develop DeepSeek through open source access, whereas the US tech giants much more careful about their developments. And this raises an interesting question just in AI tech in general, right? To open source or not to open source, right? So would you say you're more for like open the floodgates, or are there certain dangers in allowing maybe too much information to get out there? And then how would we monitor or control that?
Look, I've always been a proponent of open source everything.
Yeah.
That's something that I am. I'm a big believer in. I'm a huge believer in open source.
Okay.
Um, but I also just I can't help feeling like the US AI companies treated the entire creative and literary output of humanity as something that was open source and something
Hmm.
that they could just train on. And I do not see why the rest of us should now respect the intellectual property of companies who didn't respect ours.
Right.
I don't see how that makes sense. You know, if they can say that everything that we have ever produced is fair use for them,
Hmm.
why is the work that they have produced not fair use for everyone else?
Hmm. So a bit of a
I think
lack
it's as simple as that. Yeah,
quid pro
there is a
quo. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
there is an utter lack of um, there's been utter lack of respect for the sovereignty of our work.
Hmm.
So I think that they have not earned respect for the sovereignty of theirs.
Yeah. Oh, that's it's a good point. What are your thoughts on journalism in general? What was it like that made it better at one point than it is today? How bad is it, and could it get even worse in the future?
I mean, journalism has always been a battleground.
Hmm.
It's there has never been a moment in which journalism was as pure um, as some people want to think. It's
Right.
always been a struggle to keep it um, independent and to keep it free. You know, and
Hmm.
we had problems with like yellow journalism in the late 1800s, you know, journalism that was entirely designed to and published to align with jingoistic foreign policies and so on. You know, there have often been problems in that way, but I think we still really need an independent journalism, an independent media who can hold truth to power in the way that it's meant to.
Hmm.
And we've seen a decline in that on a number of levels. You know, one of the biggest problems I believe in journalism relates to one of the biggest problems I see in society, which is that community newspapers shut down, local newspapers
Yeah.
shut down. I mean, most of them are all gone now. And when that happened, we lost something that connected all of us. We lost this source of information and community news and this shared context for ourselves and our neighbors, the people we live with, the people we share a street with. You know, we lost that, and Facebook and so on were supposed to replace it. They really didn't. Facebook and stuff, they just siloed us and made us hate each other. You know,
Hmm.
so when we started losing those local newspapers, we lost a core part and a core function of journalism, which is to connect and inform communities. But
Hmm.
at the same time, you know, journalism has really suffered digitally because we have this idea that content wants to be free, and content might want to be free, but that's not necessarily good for the people who create content. You know,
Right.
if all journalism is free, then how do the journalists survive? That's been a problem that's been growing since the birth of the internet. So if content is free, well, how is it free? Well, journalists have to survive somehow, and the way a lot of the media properties survived was by selling ads, and those ads became increasingly exploitative. You know, digital advertising, that's a whole other problem that I've spoken about before. But these ads eventually started losing their effectiveness. They started losing ground. They started returning less and less money to the advertising companies and the platforms. There was just less and less money for these publications. Journalists have been Journalism has been a dying profession for years because there's just not enough money to pay
Right.
journalists. You know, and as the publications have become devalued or have kind of lost their way in the wilderness, they've become prime targets for private equity and for billionaires to just scoop them up and then inshitify them, gut them, or just reshape their editorial direction in the way we've seen with the LA Times and the Washington Post and so on.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think over the last 30 years, journalism has just been dying a really slow death, and it's been very sad to see. You know, I studied journalism. That was going to be my career, and even in university, back when I was studying in college, the
Hmm.
professors were saying to us, "It's great that you want to study journalism, but the unfortunate truth is that there are not going to be any jobs for you, so you should go
Yeah.
into marketing instead."
Yeah.
And I did. You know, I worked in journalism for a bit, and then I went into marketing, and I you know worked in tech marketing, worked in tech comms, burnt out on absolutely all of it. Went back to journalism, and now I'm trying to carve out my own space. I'm trying to carve
Yeah.
out
Right.
um, yeah, and so that's what I've been trying to do, and it's rough. It is rough out there.
Yeah. Do you ever see A change, like will the public get fed up? Will we reach a point at which we decide, no, we want to go more old school? We want, like, will trust and the truth and facts become important again enough for people to change?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I do believe they will be. I
Have we
think
bottomed
people
out yet? Or are we still going down?
uh, look. I don't think we've bottomed out yet. I think we've got further to
Oh,
fall.
good. There's still room.
Um, that being said, if I really had given up hope, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
I would be if I'd given up hope that things will ever get better, I would be doing everything I can to just make as much money as I can.
Yeah. Right. Right. It's funny. I interviewed George Carlin's daughter, Kelly,
Mm,
on the podcast. And George Carlin was my favorite comedian as a kid
mm,
growing up. And I said to her, when I see your dad's the evolution of his career and how he talks, he's like an educator through his
mm,
comedy. In his early days in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, he was a stoic. He would just let things kind of, he'd roll with the punches and he'd say, the world's a crazy place, but, we're going to try to keep making it better as much as we can. And then in the 90s and early 2000s, he became a bit of a skeptic. He became much more hardened
yeah,
and much more anti-religion and worried about all the nasty stuff that big organizations can do and the control and how theocracy is weaving itself into the American political system. And then in the
yeah,
last 5 years, 4 to 5 years of his life, he becomes a cynic. He becomes fed up. He says, I've tried my whole life to try to make the world a better place, and people just aren't aren't there. They're not doing it.
yeah,
So he has given up. It's good to see that you and I haven't yet, that we're still kind of interested in coming up after we've totally bottomed out. But
yeah.
yeah, we can only hope
I
that
just
this doesn't continue.
if I lost all hope, why would I still be here?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So
I think that's a that I think that it would be very sad to reach that point.
it would. It would indeed.
And I for one am not interested in surrendering hope.
Hmm. Yeah, same here. So let's talk about the ethics of decisions, especially those
Mm,
that are not easy to make because of some form of vested interest. And in one of your articles, you talked about getting off Facebook and getting off Twitter and Substack and things like this
mm,
because of their associations. Um, how is there a way to work our way through this kind of moral battleground as to what social platforms are we going to have to choose? Are we choosing the lesser of two evils, right? Is it impossible for us to not be connected in some ways with organizations or institutions that are doing nasty things, right? So,
mm,
how do we stay on top of who's doing what and how can we still be moral agents in all of this?
mm. I think it's really just making a choice to be conscious,
Mhm.
to whatever degree you can, about the decisions that you're making.
Yeah.
You don't have to be pure in everything that you do. You don't have to reject all big tech today, right now, this instant. But when you make a purchasing decision, when you buy a piece of technology, when you pay for software, ask yourself who you're paying, where's your money going, what are you doing, does this company align with your values?
Hmm.
I think it can be as simple as that, making these. I always hesitate to recommend individual solutions to systemic problems, but
Right.
to a degree, I think we all do have a responsibility to make better choices about the tools that we use.
Yeah. No, I agree. Now, you wrote a wonderful piece called "The Death of Critical Thinking Will Kill Us Long Before AI."
Mm.
in which you state our attention spans have shrunk to mere seconds. While technology has
Mm.
enabled the wide dissemination of information, it has also fragmented our thinking. We're overwhelmed by noise and sensationalism, clickbait headlines, and social media posts to our emotions, appeal to our emotions rather than our intellect, making us susceptible to misinformation. We share articles without reading them, simply reacting to, you know, provocative titles and abstracts. Context, nuance, accuracy, these things no longer matter. Objective truth has become secondary to subjective feelings and base impulses. Without reading comprehension, we cannot thoughtfully process information and make reasoned decisions. We lose the ability to thoroughly analyze issues, think critically, understand different perspectives, spot logical fallacies, and weigh evidence. Our opinions get shaped by alarmist rhetoric and confirmation bias rather than facts. We consume information, but we do not truly digest it. This erodes the very foundations of a healthy democracy and educated populace. Um, I couldn't have said it better myself. I've devoted a large part of my life to researching, writing, and teaching and lobbying for critical thinking to be included in our education systems at all levels. So, how do we get it back? How do we make critical thinking sexy again? Or is it
That's a tough one,
impossible?
isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Is it
you know,
possible?
part of the problem is the way people consume information now is antithetical to the idea of critical thinking. You
Yes.
know,
Yes.
I can't remember the exact numbers, but increasingly a lot of younger folks get their news from TikTok.
They
And
do.
TikTok is designed for immediate gratification. It's designed for very short attention spans. None of that is conducive to critical thinking.
No.
Um, so I wonder if the format of the way we consume media and so on these days is even compatible. Is it even compatible with critical thinking? I'm not sure if I know the answer to that. We need education. God, we need education. We need better
Yeah.
education. There are wonderful teachers out there who are trying their damned hardest to to teach the next generation, but they're underfunded and they are hampered and they are being actively sabotaged by lawmakers. That is a damn tragedy.
It is.
Critical thinking is it's something that you have to teach, isn't it?
It
It
is.
doesn't happen by itself. Are we teaching it? I'm not convinced that we are.
No. No, I had Steven Pinker
That's a
on,
problem.
and he says it doesn't even exist at Harvard anymore. So,
Yeah, yeah,
we've gotten away from it, which is sad,
yeah,
because when students take my courses, when I do public lectures and I extol the virtues of critical thinking, everybody's on board. It's like, nobody says, "Oh, that's a bad thing. We should be less critical in our thinking. We should just accept stuff, at face value." They see the value in it, but it's really, really difficult to get a momentum going where
yeah,
politicians, policymakers, people high up in educational fields say, "Okay, we got to change. We got to change what's going on within the system itself, and we have to make sure that kids at all ages learn some basics about what it means to think critically." Because I've often said the greatest gift you can give any human being is the ability to think critically for themselves.
yeah,
Right? There's no greater gift you can give somebody, because if you give them that, man, that is a very powerful tool to go out into
yeah.
the world with. And we're failing at it, and it's unfortunate that things have
And
come to this point. But uh,
yeah,
again,
I wish I had an answer on that
I
one.
know, same
It
here,
keeps me up at night. It keeps me up
same
at night.
here.
And part of the problem is that when people do um, talk about critical thinking and so make a fuss about fixing it, half the time what they mean by critical thinking is just being critical of the people they disagree with. It's like that's not even critical thinking,
Hmm.
is it? You know?
Hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. All right, Joan, let's finish up. Well, we can get back to Trump if we want, but let's talk about trans rights. How are you feeling about this new government coming in? You've got David Maziatra talking about Trump's ravenous bigotry towards the trans community.
Yeah,
It's a kind of organized, willful persecution of powerless minorities that fascist parties openly pursued while in power.
yeah.
what are your thoughts? What are you thinking?
And we're in the midst of a global backslide around democratic values and human rights and so on. And um, trans people are bearing the brunt of that across the
Mm,
world. There are, there are statistically not very many of us, but we are statistically taking up so much of the energy and the time and the oxygen in the political sphere that it is devastating. Um, Most of what we want to do is just live our lives, but increasingly we are the targets for ideologues and extremists and fascists and bigots and the
mm,
ignorant masses who support them. You know, people fearmonger about us, they lie about us.
hmm.
Um, and what do we end up with? It's this tiny, very vulnerable minority who are being targeted in every nation across the globe. There is a strong right wing movement to attack us, to dehumanize us, to strip away our rights. Um, Framed always as either a defense of sport or a defense of science or just asking questions, all of which are lies.
Hmm.
There are roughly 10 college level trans women who are athletes in the US, and yet their existence is a matter of federal policy and federal persecution.
Hmm.
The science has acknowledged trans people going back decades. We aren't harmful. We aren't dangerous. We're just human beings. Um, the right would like nothing more than to see a world where we are not human beings, where we don't exist at all. Um, and I'm entirely uninterested in giving them that world. So, as far as I'm concerned, they can hate us as much as they like, and I may or may not hate them back, but I'm certainly not going anywhere.
And what's the root of it? Is it just fear and ignorance? Is it just a lack of understanding? What is at the root? Obviously, they're biased differently than
Yeah.
others, but what is at that root? Is it perpetuation of discrimination? They had to learn that from somebody?
The powerful have a long and documented history of using marginalized groups to
Mhm.
whip up their voting base
Right.
to support them. Fascist and authoritarian totalitarian governments have victimized individual groups, marginalized groups for decades. My ancestors went through it in pogroms. Um, Trans people are going through it now. It's the easiest way to distract people from the actual problems in the world is to just give them somebody to blame.
Yeah.
And right now, I think trans people are being blamed for a lot of the world's problems. Not directly, but it's certainly there. Why is the government not helping you? Well, the government is spending all its money on trans people, things like that. That's the
Mm.
message that people are hearing.
Hmm.
And individual humans can be wonderful, wonderful, beautiful people, but you put a whole bunch of people together and you tell them that life sucks because of that demographic,
Mm.
that marginalized group. It's very easy to whip them up into a frenzy.
Yeah.
I think what we're seeing is um, a calculated weaponization of bigotry by rich and powerful people, whose best interests are served by keeping everyone divided and angry and destructive,
Hmm.
combined with base human ignorance, fear of the other, fear of the unknown,
The other. Yeah.
combined with the destructive power of social media
Mm.
that does away with nuance, it does away with facts, that just surfaces outrage and lies, and that's what we wound up with.
Yeah.
And this is a story as old as time. It's happened
Oh, for
before. It will
sure.
happen again.
For sure. But
Yeah,
we're going to do our best to bring them back with critical thinking, aren't we?
that's the plan. That's the plan.
And good luck to the both of us. Listen,
Yeah.
Joan, it's been great talking to you. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to be with me today. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.